Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and thanks for joining me again. One of the things that I'm known for on this channel, if you can say that I'm known for anything, are my Marc Ribot lessons, where I do lead studies in his style, using a lot of his big influences from Django Reinhardt to Hubert Sumlin. In this case, we're actually just going to learn one of his solos, his great solo from Jockey Full of Bourbon off Tom Waits' Rain Dogs album. It's actually quite a short and sweet solo, so I've added his intro as well, which is equally cool. This is a great little workout for your triads and your arpeggios, the idea of targeting the correct chord tones over the correct changes. And as always, we'll get into some technique and tone talk near the end of the video. So yeah, I'd say this is going to be a really fun lesson for anyone who just wants to elevate their chord tone based soloing with a couple of little gypsy jazz and Latin infusions. I'll also go over the chord changes that are behind these parts, and in with the lesson materials as well as my note-for-note tab and notation of the whole thing in Guitar Pro and PDF formats. I'll also provide you with my backing track as well as my audio file of the actual performance itself. Okay, so let's kick things off with the intro. Here's the chord progression. E minor, B7, B7, E minor, E minor again, B7, 2 bars, back to the E minor. So it's a 1-5 progression in the key of E minor. E minor being the 1, B7 being the 5. Now, like I said in the intro, this is a really good workout for your arpeggios and targeting chord tones. I mean, look at the first phrase, for example. Thinking E minor. Root, root, 5th, flat 3rd. All straight out of an E minor arpeggio in open position. Now, of course, I'd recommend learning the whole shape in every position, but let's just focus on that open position. Then the next note of the opening phrase lands on beat 1 of bar 2. What chord was in that bar? B7. We play the 5th of that. Again, thinking of all the chord tones, so a B7 arpeggio in that location would look like this. Picking up the notes beneath the root, like the flat 7 on the open A string there, and the 5th on that 2nd fret of the E string. And that's the note we play. So we have E minor to B7, very clearly. Now we're still on the B7, we play this note. So again, he's using that octave kind of thing like we did on the E minor. Now we're doing it on those F sharp notes, both of which are the 5th of B7. A little bit of decoration down to the major 3rd and then back to the root of E minor, right in time for the landing of that chord again. So now you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we get a bit chromatic, very Django, gypsy jazz style. We go from the flat 3 of E minor, walk all the way down to the root of E minor. So we're visualizing again chord tones, right? Root, flat 3, and just tying the points together. And then the chord goes to B7, and we repeat the same idea on that chord. Well, I say same idea, it's the same kind of frets, but one string set closer to the floor. If we're looking at the chord tones, now we're getting some interesting stuff. In relation to B7, we're getting the flat 9, the root, the flat 7, with a passing major 7 on the way. So all very common notes that you'll see in jazz played over a 5 chord, B7. You'll often hear the sound of a B7 flat 9. Again, it's that gypsy kind of vibe. And that's basically what we're doing here. You could also think of all of that stuff as belonging to the E harmonic minor scale, if you like. Which resolves really nicely back to that E minor chord, builds a lot of tension over the B7. Now for the remainder of the intro, we're still on B7 at this point. We're just going to grab the root of that chord and play it with that staccato kind of Latin rhythm, and then slide away and connect to the root of the E minor chord that's just appeared. Very simple. So I'm just going to play the intro along with the metronome here. As always, that's a good way to practice things and make sure your timing is accurate. I'm going to do it at a slightly slower speed of 140 BPM. 1, 2, 3, 4. make sure that you pick very hard. We'll get into a bit more on those specifics later, but really go for a bit of force behind your picking attack. Okay, now let's get into the solo. It's going to be a very similar approach. A lot of use of chord tones and arpeggios and harmonic minor, typical gypsy jazz kind of inflections. Let's cover the chord changes first. E minor for 3 bars. B7 for 4 bars. Back to the E minor for 4 bars. B7 for 4 bars. E minor to A minor. And that A minor is really the beginning of the bridge, where the solo is finished and the vocals come back in. So we begin the solo with this neat little pickup phrase, and then that's really where beat 1 of that chord progression kicks in. So again, thinking of chord tones for E minor, right? There's your root, there's your flat 3, there's your 5th, and there's a little scale degree along the way just to make these connections a little more neat and tidy. Back to the root. So getting a bounce around happening between the root and the 5th, you know, a good old power chord kind of sound. The rhythm's quite heavily syncopated there. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. A little slower. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. A lot of ands, you know, a lot of offbeat stuff. Still on the E minor, that same group of notes. And then B7 comes along, and we target that flattened 7. You could easily be just thinking of this B7 chord shape if you like, just to make things easier to visualize. Then very much like in the intro, we get a little bit of color going on here by adding notes from the E harmonic minor scale. Over the B7 we're thinking sharpened 5th, which is a great tension to add to that chord. That augmented sound. Then down to the 5th, then the 4, and then the major 3rd. And we play that with quarter note triplet feel, so. And then the same kind of idea, still on the B7, but starting on the flat 9. Flat 9, root, flat 7, then down to the 5th. So again, focusing heavily on the B7 arpeggio that underpins the whole thing, and adding colours like the flat 9 or the sharp 5, and playing around with that stuff. Again, that's where you could see that all of those notes really belong to the parent scale of the E harmonic minor scale. It is important though that you map out those chord tones very clearly and confidently so that you've got little places to escape to from the notes that add tension to the more grounded notes like the 5th, the root and the 3rd, and the flat 7 in this case. And then we play. And I like to double up this note with the open E string on top. I don't think he does that, but I quite like the sound of that. Adds a little bit extra spice to it. And then E minor comes along and we just grab the root. Again with some heavily syncopated rhythm. That's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then we go back down an octave to the same note and then bounce back and forth between the notes of that E5 power chord we spoke about earlier. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Now we get into this really playful little Djangoism, a very common idea in the world of gypsy jazz, and it's kind of a half enclosure. So here's our target note. This is over the E minor chord, so it's a target note because it belongs to the E minor arpeggio. It's one of your chord tones, it's the 5th. You can add a semitone below it to create a bit of push and pull around that note, create a bit of tension. If you wanted to add the full enclosure, you'd have a semitone above in this case as well. So you'd have above, below, and then finally you'd land the target note. Now the enclosure thing is something I've spoken about a lot in my videos, so I'll link to that in the description. But just as a quick summary, it's always a semitone below. So let's take E minor in this case, root, flat 3, 5. So a semitone below each of those notes. It's got that Pink Panther kind of vibe. Now for the note that you choose that's above it, it's not just simply a semitone or a whole tone, it's dependent on the scale that you're pulling the notes from. So it's got to be a scale degree above and a semitone below. So in this case, we're thinking the E harmonic minor. So the scale degree above the E is this F sharp note, so that's a whole tone above it. Then you could go below, and then on the flattened third here, a whole tone above, semitone below. Then on the fifth here, a semitone above, semitone below, and then you target. So that would be the full picture of these enclosures. Sounds pretty effective, right? In this case, we're just using that little passing note from a semitone below. And then walking down to target the fifth of the B7 that's now landed. So we've got this note in mind, this F sharp, and we're just navigating our way to it. Now this phrase makes it clearer than ever that we're just targeting notes from arpeggios. So we're on B7. So what's that? The root, the third and the fifth, with a neat little slide along to the third from the second. It's not too dissimilar to some of those lovely Hendrix-isms, is it? That kind of stuff, where you're just simply mapping out the root and the third and using that scale note as a note to, as a vehicle to get between them. Very nice sounding group of notes, that. I often talk about that stuff as well in my videos. Surprise, surprise. That's a 1, 2, 3, 5 arpeggio. 1, 2, 3, 5. We play it with that really nice sort of Latin swagger. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4. And then to finish the solo, we're still on B7. We're thinking, how can we tie this neatly into the E minor that's about to appear? We do this run. Using the E harmonic minor scale in its complete form, starting on the root of the B7 and going up to the flat 9 and back and down the scale, using this major third as your sort of target. So in my mind, I'm thinking of this B7 arpeggio in this location. And just sort of cordoning off this section from the root, flat 7, fifth down to the third, and then just thinking about how the E harmonic minor would exist within that framework. And then resolving to E minor on beat 1 of the chord's arrival. And just literally climbing the E minor arpeggio within that C shape, if we're thinking of the caged system. And then, like I said earlier, we now tie into the bridge where the vocals take over again. The chord there is A minor, the 4 chord of the key. So we just slide up to the root of that chord. Pretty neat. Okay, so just like with before, I'm going to play that with the metronome at 140 BPM. Kind of a good practice speed. Feel free to do it much slower to really get the nuances of the timing, the phrasing, and the dynamics. Remember to pick quite hard as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so technique-wise, I mentioned picking hard. I think putting some muscle behind these notes is really important to make them pop. You know, you can really hear him doing that on these recordings, really pushing that note to its saturation level where it's really compressed. You know, you can almost hear it slapping back against the fretboard. There's two ways you can accomplish that kind of sound, and both of them require a fairly sturdy pick, one with no real flex in it, no bend. One is to use the gypsy jazz rest stroke technique, which I'm sure is what's inspired Marc to do this, as a big follower of Django himself. Hey Rosie, good girl. Do you want to come up and say hi? Up, up. No, you're feeling tired? Just going to go to sleep at my feet, that's fine. What's this? Good girl, beautiful. So with the rest stroke technique, which is something again that I've gone into at length in other videos of mine, specifically the gypsy jazz videos, the idea is to strike the string hard enough with a downstroke that the pick actually rests on the string underneath the one you're trying to hit. You know, adds a real punch to the front end of the note. It requires a loose wrist. It requires that you free float the wrist so you can really strike with a flick of the wrist, a very kind of aggressive action. Flick down at the strings from above. The other way to do it, if you don't want to completely have to overhaul your entire picking experience, is to try and pluck the string from underneath and pop it upwards a little bit. Almost like you're finger picking and getting under the string and popping it against the fretboard. You could do that just by using a lot of upstrokes. You could also do it on a downstroke. You get kind of under the string and pluck it upwards. Again, a nice alternative if you don't fancy going down that rabbit hole of gypsy jazz rest stroke picking. If you are doing the rest stroke picking thing, again, make sure that most of your hits are downstrokes. Use upstrokes fairly sparsely, only where the rhythm really dictates that you need them. Now, tone-wise, I'm not sure on the exact guitar that Marc used to record this. I've seen pictures of him and videos of him around that time using a black Telecaster, so maybe it was that one. Who knows? The important thing though is that you want to be on the bridge pickup for a bit of that honky, nasal, mid-range bite, and you also want to be using a mild bit of overdrive. Today I'm just happening to use the Royal Blue overdrive by Mad Professor. It's just what's on the board right now. I didn't really cherry pick it particularly for this. I think maybe the closest thing for this sound would be something like a Tube Screamer, which again is just going to accentuate those mids even more. Run the gain very low, maybe push the volume a little bit to break up the amp itself as opposed to getting too much drive from the pedal. Of course, one really important factor for this sound is that rockabilly type of slapback echo. Single repeat, maybe somewhere like 130 to 140 milliseconds of delay time. Pretty cool sound, right? Kind of Tarantino-esque. I'm also using some fairly fast tremolo on this one. For the lesson, I've dialed the intensity back a bit so it doesn't get too annoying, but in the performance at the start, I had the intensity set quite high. I'm using my Strymon Flint for this, by the way, on the, what's it called? The 63 tube tremolo setting. And I've got the speed at midday, and the intensity for the recording would have been at around midday as well. Let me turn that up a bit. So yeah, it probably would have sounded a bit more like this. Notice how I'm picking near the bridge as well, I should have mentioned that. Just gives you a bit more of that spike and urgency to the sound. The amp I'm using is my Lazy J20 and I have it set pretty clean. Again, like that overdrive is maybe pushing the front end a little bit harder into some saturation, but it's quite subtle. And I'm recording this through the Universal Audio aux box. Pick-wise, I'm using a Dunlop H3, and the strings on this guitar are String Joy Signatures, gauges 11 to 48, I believe. I love those strings, really beautiful under the fingers, and they have great tone and they seem to last a long time. The guitar itself, of course, is the Novo Myris J, one of my favourite guitars. Very inspiring, really brings out a different side to my playing. I love the tremolo on it. This mastery trem just feels so good. It's my favourite type of trem anyway, the sort of jazz master trem. So it's really got a lot of my favourite appointments in one instrument, because I love the P90 sound as well. I was on the bridge pickup the whole time, by the way, and these are Fralin P90 pickups. Naturally, they actually have quite an aggressive, honky mid-range bite to them, which is perfect for this sort of stuff. For the opening performance, I was using a fantastic 037 Cadet guitar made by the great Karl Longbottom. Just a fine piece of work, like a Les Paul Jr. type of vibe with a killer bridge P90 pickup. Built to insanely high levels, with such a thick and chewy sound, incredible guitar to play. And there we have it, a nice little study on the lead playing approach of Marc Ribot circa 1985. Do check out the Rain Dogs album. Of course, it's a fantastic album from start to finish. One of the most iconic Tom Waits records, and it's littered full of amazing guitar playing. Okay, let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed the lesson. I always like to hear from you. And make sure to go ahead and ask any questions that you might have. That's what I'm here for. And do make sure to go ahead and like and subscribe. Those things make a huge difference to the visibility and growth of this channel, and I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, enjoy this one and take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.